Well, good morning and good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for joining this Workday webinar with Salmat. My name is Craig Todd. I'm from Workday. I'm based here in Sydney, and it's my pleasure today to introduce David Dunne and Michael Small from Salmat, who are going to talk a little bit about their experience with Workday. So David is Head of People and Systems, Head of People, Systems and Operations, I think I got that right, at Salmat, and obviously very focused on the HR part of their implementation. And Michael looks after finance programs and obviously looks after the financial part of their rollout. So, a big part of the advantage of their Workday implementation was having this combined HR and financials system. And it's great that we've got both sides of the story here to talk about it today. So with that, I'll hand over to you guys. Actually, before I do, just to mention on Q&A, we've got a lot of people on the call today, so we have everyone muted. We're going to be taking some questions at the end of the session. If you wouldn't mind putting those in through the chat window or the Q&A panel, and we'll pick them up after the presentations. So with that, over to you, Michael.
So thanks for having us, Craig, and thanks to everyone for joining the call. I'm really delighted to be here and be able to share the Salmat story with you. We've titled our presentation From the Ridiculous to the Sublime because I think it really reflects pretty accurately the journey we've taken in the last 18 months or so. We'll take you through the detail of that over the course of the presentation. So just to touch on the safe harbor statement, I think most people will be familiar with this slide from previous presentations, particularly if you're already a Workday customer. But really, anything we mention in the presentation, any forward-looking statements should be considered as such, and we will touch on some plans for the future that we may or may not change in due course. So just a little bit more about us, the presenters. So I think you may have picked up the slight accent already, but just in case you haven't, I'm originally from Dublin in Ireland. I've been in Sydney for about 10 years. And as Craig mentioned previously, I'm the Head of People Systems and Operations. In the context of this presentation, my role on the project, the implementation of Workday for Salmat, was the HCM stream lead. A little bit of general knowledge about me, I guess, is that I'm a keen runner and like to compete in long-distance events.
And my name is Michael Small. I'm Head of Finance Programs, as Craig said. I've been with Salmat for a bit over 5 years in various senior commercial roles before taking on this more IT type of role, and born and bred in Sydney and love live music. Thought we'd start by just putting some context of who Salmat is and why the need for the change in the business. So basically, Salmat was founded in 1979. Two entrepreneurs and good mates, Phil Salter and Peter Maddock. They saw a gap in the direct mail business, and then over the next 35 years, from a two-man operation, grew the business to what it is today. A very successful multi-platform marketing communications company. It's listed about 10 years ago and currently employs 3,500 people across 4 countries, including Australia, New Zealand, Philippines, and Sri Lanka. About 2 years ago, just on 2 years ago, we got a new CEO, Craig Dower, joined the company, and he kicked off a transformation program across all of Salmat, basically to try and simplify and transform the business and use that as a basis to grow the business. Workday and the project we're about to talk about today is seen as a fundamental part of that transformation.
So just building on that context, a bit of additional context in relation to Salmat's history is that a lot of the growth that Salmat's experienced over the last 35 years or so has been the acquisition. So we've had a number of businesses acquired as part of our overall strategy, and that has kind of resulted in the boarding platform that you're seeing on the screen now, which effectively is lots of different ways of managing, from a HR perspective, lots of different ways of managing people-related processes, very manual processes in place, so no real system to speak of. If you think about the timeline on the screen here, October 14, really our only HR system, if you like, was an ESS platform as part of our payroll system, which had very limited capability and in essence managed leave and payslips. So really we're coming from a very low base from a HR perspective in terms of system capability and the ability to manage data and insights.
It's pretty much the same story on the finance side. We had an ERP system that was unsupported. It was that old, so it was a lot of underinvestment in this area. And when new acquisitions came on board, they were sort of cobbled together. So we ended up with a whole lot of manual processes and basically reliant on sort of good people to be able to gather the data and pull it together and make sense of it, but very inefficient and led to, you know, a very big finance team just to keep the lights on. So it's pretty much our starting point. We had pretty much a mess of all of our systems, and what we did was at the start of the project, we mapped out all of the systems that we had in the business across, you know, each of the structures. So we looked at sales, operation, and support, and then broke it down into the various streams of the business. And I guess we were horrified when we sort of saw this, because a lot of these systems all stand alone, very little integration. If there was integration, it was very, very manual type of integrations. And so it just led to a situation where something had to happen if we were going to transform the business. With the Workday solution and what Workday Outlook has been able to offer us is we've been able to already identify a lot of these systems that, so in the dark blue there is what we see as what Workday can replace on the finance side, and on the purple is the systems that the HR systems that Workday can replace. So diagrammatically, you can see there, you know, how much breadth that Workday will have in our business.
So it was pretty clear that we had an opportunity to improve our systems architecture and capability. When we started to look at the implementation of a new system, and particularly wanting to look at the implementation of a system that had both finance and HCM capability, we really wanted to look at a pure cloud solution. We wanted to try and get ahead of the curve in terms of the capability that we were bringing into our business to really drive that transformation. From a change perspective, in terms of how we went about that, as Michael mentioned, our new CEO started in April 2014. By August of that year, he had brought in a new CFO and CPO, as Chief People Officer, to help lead that transformation. Very quickly after they joined, they identified some of the very significant gaps that we've talked through already in relation to our systems and processes, and kicked off a formal review of solutions in the market. In the context of that process, which can take typically 6, 8, 12 months, we got through that really quickly. In the course of a couple of months, we had shortlisted vendors down to 3 potential solutions, and then shortlisted from there to 2, and then made a decision and signed a contract in December of that year. So it was quite a condensed process, and when you see the remainder of the pack, you'll see that the project itself was quite a condensed project as well. So change happened pretty slowly for a while, and then it happened very suddenly for us, and then we were kind of into project implementation from January 15.
So like all projects, scope is the key thing, and trying to stick within the scope, and particularly when you start all the design sessions and that, you've got to get, keep a lid on people wanting to add things in. We were very clear from the start that we had to replace our finance ERP system, and so all of those elements had to be brought across, and as much HR as we could in the timeline. So we set ourselves till July of last year to go live, and so that's what we worked from. It also had to be included in all of our locations, so we couldn't just roll this out in Australia and not the other countries, and that added obviously the dimension of risk to it as well. We had 47 integrations as well. So if you think back to that map of systems where we were, still had to have operational systems talking to our finance and HR system, meant that we had all of these integrations. 34 of those were automated and 13 were manual. And of the automated ones, only 5 were rated as simple. So we sort of broke a whole lot of new ground, both with Workday and third parties, as part of this project. We're also able to remove our EP1 system. ICMS was our expense management system. Remesis was our remuneration. Hyperion and SharePoint were our reporting systems.
I think there's a particular area that we struggle with here that's worth calling out, which was payroll. So the payroll system that we used at that time and still use today is Orion. When Michael mentioned that we broke some new ground with some of the integration, that was one of the areas where we did break new ground, which, to be honest, wasn't intentional. We were hoping that we weren't the first to do it, but it ended up that we were. And so there was some added complexity there, because you obviously can't have an integration with a payroll system from a source system like Workday that doesn't carry data accurately, because you've got to pay people correctly. So there was quite a lot of risk involved in a lot of those integrations, but Orion specifically as a third-party vendor was one that we found quite challenging and quite time-consuming to manage. And ultimately we made the right level of progress, but I think it's one that's worth calling out for someone considering implementing Workday and integrating with a payroll system. It is an area that requires quite a lot of focus.
So like any project, there's a number of risks, and regardless of the timeline, most of these ones we're calling out here you would have anyway. So the ones that we were told from the beginning around change management is probably the most critical one, and it's certain in our client reference checks that we did before or during the selection process. All of the feedback was, Workday won't let you down, it'll be yourselves, in terms of Workday will meet their deadlines, but if you don't get your own internal processes sorted on the change management side, then it will be lead to failure. So we focused on that from the start. Obviously, we were being first in Australia for finance, and to do a combined HR and finance implementation had its big risks around it. The other key one I want to call out is around the financial data model. This is basically the chart of accounts, for anyone who's not a Workday customer at the moment with finance. This is the heart of the finance piece of Workday. And our previous chart of account was fundamentally broken. And so it was good in one way, because it gave us the opportunity to go to the board and say, look, if we're going to transform the business and change the chart of account structure, bringing history across is going to be not really relevant, because it's not going to make a whole lot of sense. So by not having to bring history across, definitely reduced a lot of the risk in terms of meeting the timeline, because a lot of time goes into data conversions on these sort of projects. So we work closely with Workday to get this financial data model right in terms of one that fitted the new Salmat, and don't underestimate the importance of understanding this, because when we all thought we understood it, you learn something new every day about it, the complexity of it, but at the same time, it just opens up a whole new world of reporting in terms of the dimensions that it can give to your business. So you do need to focus attention on that piece, and Workday can provide good support in that area. And the other thing I wanted to call out on this slide is about just because we were first in Australia for finance, there were no local Workday resources, so we had to work with Workday to bring offshore resources, and we worked closely with Workday on this, and they did manage the time zones, or manage to our time zones if they weren't on site.
So obviously a lot of risks in the project from the outset. Another point there on Michael's list was the compressed time frame and the immovable deadline. And in the context of our project, we really had to hit the 1 July time frame. From a finance perspective, of course, the new financial year starts on 1 July, so we couldn't traverse 2 financial years when implementing that solution. So we really did need to manage our risks very proactively. How did we do that? There were a few things that we needed to do. The ones that specifically we're calling out, I think, are C-level support and sponsorship. So we had, in many respects, a new executive team in place. We certainly had new executives in the key roles sponsoring the project. And so we had absolute clarity on what was required from that group of people, and we had absolute support from them in addressing any issues or roadblocks quickly, and making sure that we were able to achieve that compressed timeline. I think from a Salmat perspective, it was really useful for us to be in a situation where we couldn't customize the product. We could, of course, configure Workday to meet our business requirements, but we couldn't customize the solution to be completely different to the Workday standard. For Salmat as a business, that was a very new thing, and quite difficult, I think, for some people to grasp that change. But for us, it really helped to drive a level of consistency and simplicity in our processes, and it helped us to really reevaluate what we were doing, both system-centric and offline, to really make those processes more effective. So that was a massive benefit, even though at the time it seemed like a really challenging situation. The other point there we're calling out, I think, is the dedicated project and change management. So again, from a Salmat perspective, we had never really, in our history, dedicated specific project and change resource to a project of this nature, or indeed of any sort of medium-sized large project, from the very start. So that was a new thing for us. It was very specific guidance from our executive team that we needed to have those dedicated resources on the project from day one, and I think that made the world of difference in the end result. The final point there is also relevant in that because we were the first full platform customer in APJ and the first finance customer in Australia, one of the criteria that we had in signing the deal with Workday was that we worked in partnership to deliver the project within that timeline, and I think ultimately we did that very effectively, and that is largely the reason we were successful. So in terms of the project team, what it looked like, it's probably fairly standard in terms of a project structure. We had a stream for HR or HCM and a stream for finance. Each of those streams led respectively by Michael and I. We then had our OCM resource across the whole project, as well as our technology and integration resources across the whole project. Our dedicated project manager, as I mentioned, who had extensive experience in ERP implementations, albeit traditional ERP implementations. He had that experience previously, which was helpful. And again, the steering committee, having our executive sponsors from a Salmat perspective, but also having executive level engagement from Workday really did make the difference in pushing through those roadblocks quickly. We followed the Workday standard deployment methodology. So to recap, we signed our agreement mid-December and effectively started our planning stage from there. That obviously fell over the Christmas period, so there was a little bit of delay in that, but we kicked off officially towards the end of January. The streams, interestingly, operated on a slightly different cycle. So the HCM team were probably 2 weeks ahead of the finance team due to resourcing constraints for the plan, architect, and most of configure and prototype stages. So we were operating slightly out of sync. And then from the end of configure and prototype through test, deploy, and support, we were fully in sync. The way we managed that was through some fairly tight governance at both a project management level and a steering committee level to ensure that we were communicating on a weekly basis the status updates, and again ensuring that we were collaborating on changes that we were proposing to make that would have an impact on the other streams. So we had, I think, a fairly tight process in place there to manage that communication, and that was really important, particularly in those early stages. And again, the project management and OCM component right across the project from start to finish was a really valuable addition, and can't overstate the importance of the change management piece. It really, for us, was very new. In retrospect, it's really clear the value that resource and that focus brought to the project and ultimately brought to the successful deployment and engagement with the system.
So on 1 July we went live, and it's not a fairy tale. It's one where we had teething problems like any large project like this. I think what it did give us, fundamentally, a single source of truth for our finance and our HR systems, which was one of our key objectives. One area that we've had to spend a lot of time post-go live on is around reporting in the finance side. A lot of that came about, though, because of that fact that we didn't have, it was a brand new financial data model, and we had no historical data to be able to test again. So that gave us its own challenges that we had to work through. It's good to say that we're on the other side of that now. We've got dashboards and reporting up and running for most parts of the business, and teaching the managers to be able to be self-sufficient came from a culture very much where reports were pushed out to managers. We're moving to a culture where people are able to go in now and self-serve on their reporting side. So, as we approached go live there, I think we prepared for the worst in the context of the size of the project and the level of change it meant for our business, both from a systems and process perspective, but probably more importantly from a behavioural perspective. So our hope obviously was that the effort we put in from a change management perspective would mitigate that risk of change resistance. But we had to put in a lot of time and energy into having a war room prepared, having individual mobile phones ready. We were ready to be on call 24/7. The whole thing was set up for the worst possible scenario. So what actually happened on 1 July is so I don't mean that in a negative context, I mean that in a positive context. So we had very limited queries, and I think that's largely because we had coordinated resources in every location to be change champions for this project. So there was already communication happening in the months leading up to go live, and so people were already clear on what we were doing and why. And I think the other reason is because there was already a level of desire from users generally, particularly from the super users in
HR and finance, but from users generally, to have a system that they could actually use to collaborate and track details and look up colleagues and do all the simple things that we couldn't previously do. This slide just gives a bit of a demonstration on our engagement rates and ramp up over the first couple of weeks. We had a goal to have 80% unique users logged on by the 6-week mark of go live. So this slide represents about 2.5 weeks in, and we were close to that mark then, but by the time we hit our 6-week mark, we hit 85%. So we achieved our goal, and obviously from there we needed to continue to build that momentum through continuing to communicate to people the benefits of the system, and there's a couple of examples we'll use which demonstrate that.
One example we had on the finance side was on the expenses. When we were in the design phase, it gave us an opportunity to look at some of the processes that probably didn't make a whole lot of sense. One of them was around the way Salmat managed its personal expenses or business expenses using company credit cards. Previously, Salmat would just pay the card at the end of the month and hope that the manager put in their claim to extract the expenses. This meant that we had, on average, about $500,000 sitting on our balance sheet each month of undocumented expense claims, and the compliance rate pre-Workday was about 31%. We flipped it around by saying, well, we made the employee accountable, and by using a smarter process using Workday, because our previous one was pretty horrific anyway, which was a contributor to why people didn't put in their expenses, because it was just difficult. But with the Workday mobile app in particular, photographing the expense, putting it straight through, and then having a commitment from the finance team that each week approved expenses would be paid, meant that not only the business was able to simplify, but we were able to get a 95 or 90+% compliance on something like expense claims.
Another really important initiative we use and continue to use today to drive engagement is leaderboards at an executive level. So one of the important decisions we made pre-go live was that we would not migrate certain data from our payroll system. So data relating to contact information and emergency contact, so home address details and emergency contact details, we really felt the data was either incomplete or unreliable. And so we made the decision not to carry that specific data set across, which meant that we needed to drive engagement and usage of users in putting that data in as early as possible from go live. So the way we did that was we actually built a leaderboard which demonstrated by executive across each of those line items that we thought were important, which were photo, work phone, home phone, emergency contacts, and work email. The leaderboard just demonstrated how we were tracking against each of those elements and ensured on a weekly basis that the executive team had a view on where we had work still to do. And that really assisted us in getting that data up to date quickly. We also use and continue to use that same capability for managing KPI completion, so ensuring that people have logged their KPIs in Workday and those KPIs have been approved. And there will be further opportunities for us as we roll out additional functionality from a HCM perspective to continue using that capability to, again, inform the executive on progress.
The last thing, just on the cutover, one of the things, using a pure cloud solution like Workday meant that you didn't have the annoying things that you usually have with a typical implementation, where you need to have a little bit of software on the desktop. As long as people had the internet and the browser, then we didn't have any of those headaches. Not to say that you don't have headaches around people forgetting passwords. We had all of those sort of things, but at least we didn't have to worry about any hardware issues of making sure that people had the right configuration on their desktop. So some of the key learnings we just want to leave you with, we just want to call out. We've spoken a lot, and we can't underestimate the executive sponsorship, the importance of that, and not only at the executive management level, but at the board level, you really do need to have their total buy-in to help drive it, particularly when you get to difficult points of the project where there is change resistance. Having their support makes it a whole lot easier. In terms of setting up the teams, you have to obviously try and get as many subject matter experts involved as early as possible and as frequent as possible. That's through the design, the review and the testing phases. And it's one of those things where you've got to listen to all of the views, but you need someone in that room that can actually make a decision. If you have to keep referring stuff back to committees around design, then it will just elongate the project and make it much more difficult for everyone involved. And also then second-guessing current practice. Because we were transforming the business, we had, I guess, that momentum and support where we could actually challenge pretty much everything. So we would always start with what was the out-of-the-box configuration and how, if at all, we had to change it. And that is sort of puts people on the spot to be able to say, well, why do we need to change it if there's 1,000 customers using Workday globally doing it this way? Why do we need to actually have to modify it?
Yep. I think the other key learnings for us were as long as you've got a clear remit and clear support from your executive team and you know what the end goal is, you're going to face difficult situations in a project like this, particularly with a tight time frame, and there will be differences of opinion and differences in terms of priorities that need to be worked through. But in the end, if you've got that remit and that sense of purpose, then you will get through that. And I think that's an experience we've both had through that project. The other thing is that no matter how much you invest in change, and I feel like we did invest well in change, you will always have people who sit on either end of that change readiness spectrum. And while the desired end game is always to bring as many people along the journey with you as you can, there will be people who aren't capable of doing that or don't want to do that, and I think that needs to be understood from the outset. We certainly have had an experience where we have had some resistance and we've worked through that, but in the end, some people just do not want to adapt to the new way of working, and you've got to keep going irrespective of that. So that's we went live, as I said, in July last year. We're now 9 months post go live. Things are settling down, so we have got a certain amount of operating rhythm going. It's important to call out too that every 6 months there's a new version of Workday that comes out. You have to factor that into your plans because 3 months after we went live, version 25 came out. We had to start preparing for that in mid-August, so 6 weeks after go live, and working through that process. It's fair to say we've just gone through another release, version 26. We were able to use a lot of our project and test plans. A lot of it is just regression testing, just making sure your integrations are working, checking that the applications are doing what they're supposed to, and getting the teams involved that are using it day to day to spend a couple of hours doing that, and making sure you do that in a structured way. It's not too onerous. But pros of that is that you are always, then everyone's on the same version, it's up to date, you never have to worry about 2-year horizons of, we've got to do a major upgrade. That sort of goes out the window with this type of model. Yep, so one of the things that we actually discovered in our Workday 25 release. So that was, again, our first opportunity to go through the release cycle. It became clear to us that we were not, it's not recommended that you use that release window to actually try and introduce new functionality that's coming out as part of the release. The focus very much is on regression testing with a view to then releasing new functionality post the release window. So that's just an interesting learning we had that anyone who hasn't gone through the process yet may get benefit from. In terms of where we're at right now, from a HCM perspective, we've got a couple of projects happening. One is talent and compensation. So when we launched Workday back in July, we launched Core HCM, which meant that we had all of the critical HCM components in place, but we, at that time, given the time frame, we decided not to build out the detailed talent and compensation functionality. We've just finished a 10-week project to do that. So we deployed that functionality into production last Monday, and we will start to use that at our financial year end for performance reviews, performance calibration, and salary reviews. The other piece of work that we're working on at the moment that we'll close out in April is the introduction of what's known as an initiating manager role. This is, I think, a pretty important point to consider if you've got a large organization with complex reporting structures like we have. So a large part of our business is contact centers, so we have a lot of team leaders in place who each manage their own teams. When we went live with Workday initially, the option was to give those team leaders the manager role for security, which would give them all manager responsibilities or nothing at all. And we chose nothing at all due to the way those roles are structured in our business. Workday has since come up with an innovation that allows you to provide a team leader with a cut-down version of a manager role, which we're now implementing in our contact centers to bring some consistency and clarity to our operating structures. So that's a really positive thing that we are doing at the moment that I see as an enhancement to what we originally launched.
Yeah, and the other big project, or referring to as phase 3 of our Workday implementation, we're rolling out in June our time and attendance. We have a contact centre business, and so we've got 1,500 people that will use that, as well as our warehouse. As part of that project, we also will roll out the full absence piece for Australia and New Zealand, and also incorporate the payslip functionality. So that's us in a nutshell. So we're happy to take any questions, and thank you for your time.
Well, thanks a lot, guys. That was some great insights into the project. We've got a few questions that have come through. If you'd like to ask some questions, please plug those into the chat window, and I'll relay them on. We're going to need to stay on mute because we've got a large audience, so I think that would just be chaos. So question number 1, could you articulate where you managed to realise actual benefits from having a combined finance and HR platform as opposed to having disparate systems integrated together, and who benefited the most from this?
Well, from a finance point of view, I think Salmat is basically 85% of our cost is labour, and it's interesting when you sort of look at that and you think, well, we really had no investment in proper HR systems prior to Workday, and so if you're trying to get sort of an insight into your biggest cost driver, that, you know, and you've got no real systems to manage that apart from a payroll system to pay people, then it really is obvious that you need something that to help give you insight to that. So I think having from a reporting point of view on the financial side of things, having that integration really does help us slice and dice our biggest cost component. And what we see is going forward, particularly when the planning piece comes out in I think, Workday 27, that will really help us get, full benefit of having HR and finance in one place where we can then do planning off that.
Yeah, there's obviously an efficiency benefit in having everything in one system. At a practical level, I think it's fair to say that we've realised some cost savings as a result of having that system, the combined system in place in both functions. And essentially that's something we might see more of in the future. But in the end, if you stretch back to 18 months and think about what life was like back then, for us, it was basically two very different and disparate functions operating effectively in silos, not communicating well, if at all, and really having no collective view of the organisation's performance or no collective process by which we would work together. So even at its simplest level, having a combined system where it does encourage collaboration to happen more readily, and as Michael said, you can drive reporting across the whole of the business is a huge benefit for us.
Cool. Okay, question number 2. Can I ask whether you implemented an HR case management solution alongside the Workday HCM system, for example, ServiceNow, and what was your experience with this?
No, we didn't, is the answer. So we have our own internal help desk system, which is an outsourced solution we have with Fujitsu. We didn't make any changes to our help desk system as a result of implementing Workday.
Cool. Okay, next question. Could you clarify again how large the dedicated project team was? It looked to be around 20 full-time people. Is this correct?
Yeah, it would be about 20 across all the streams. Mind you, it was only, elapsed time was 6.5 months. By the time we actually were able to take people out of their day jobs and backfill them, it was probably, in realistic terms, March by that time that happened. So, but it's something that really, a project of this size and the timeline, it's worth the investment, because I've seen projects where people don't do that, and as part of their day job they have to try and do a major implementation, and what typically happens is it just gets delayed and delayed and delayed. And one, we couldn't afford that to happen, and two, each month of delay is a huge cost. So it's a false economy by saying, oh no, we'll just have people do their day job and do this.
Cool. Okay. Next question. The number of logins on mobile seemed low compared to desktop. Was the change program focused on desktop, or was the uptake just lower in mobile?
That's a great question. I think the answer is the change program was focused on both, but it was more heavily focused on desktop. Really, the way we promoted mobile use was heavily around to manage expenses on mobile, which is what we saw as one of the key benefits at the time. There's obviously a number of other functions you can use mobile for, but I think even today, if you look at the stats, mobile usage is still, in relative terms, quite low and lower than where we would want it to be.
That's going to change as soon as we roll out absence. The example we're using internally on absence is that if people they're sick and they go to the doctor, they'll be able to photograph their medical certificate and do that via the mobile phone. They'll be able to apply for leave via their mobile phone, and when we do time tracking, they'll be able to check in and out via their mobile phone using an IP address so that they know that they're in the building. So I think, yes, initially people were mostly focused on desktop, but it'll naturally migrate to mobile as more functionality is rolled out.
Okay, cool. Next question. Being a cloud solution and hosting HR data, did you run into any issues with data location for your regional offices?
Our lawyers looked at that before we signed, and I guess they were satisfied in the end that the security that Workday have and the location met all our local legal obligations. One thing that, and we still have issues with DBAs, the one thing that the penny drop for us in terms of security was really around the fact that not even Workday can access your data at a data level. Everyone's got to go in through the application layer, and that's a fundamental difference to most other ERP systems, whereby you still have DBAs going in and accessing data at the data level, bypassing any security. So I think once the lawyers understood that and the IT people understood that, I think that ticked a lot of boxes.
Cool. How do you ensure that you use new functionality coming out with the new versions of Workday?
Another great question. So the way we've managed it is, I touched a little bit on this previously, is we use the release window specifically to assess and evaluate new functionality coming out, but we really use the release window for regression testing and testing of security. Our approach post-release has been to phase the functionality that we believe is useful to our business, almost like a mini project plan, if you like, post-release to determine when we want to introduce certain new features, obviously allowing for time to test before we actually roll those into production. So we've done it very much on a structured functionality by functionality basis. I think it's fair to say, though, that we're still trying to optimize that process, and I think we probably have room for improvement there in terms of how quickly we actually make that happen post-release. But it's been successful so far.
Yeah. I think too, having a release every 6 months means that you do get a lot of incremental changes. So, there will be big leaps. As I said, in version 27, there will be a new planning module. But for the 2 releases we've seen on the finance side, there's been incremental changes. So some that aren't relevant to us, we're able to flick through. But those that are, we can easily switch them on progressively through the upgrade cycle. So that's something that you can just do at your own pace and relevance to the business.
Cool. We've got a lot of questions coming through, so there's a few more to go. Were there any specific challenges you faced with the multinational implementation?
Yes.
Yeah.
Cultural distance.
I think to be brutally frank, we've had some challenges from a HCM perspective, particularly with our Philippines colleagues, and I really don't think it's a complexity issue, as in I don't think we've failed to train people properly or we've failed to manage the change properly. I really feel the issues are largely behavioural. And so we have had challenges, and to some extent we still have challenges with getting the same level of engagement and usage from the Philippines. And we continue to focus on that area. Our key leverage point in making the engagement levels higher, I guess, is ensuring that we've got leadership buy-in from Australia, because ultimately everyone in the Philippines reports to someone in Australia. So we have had some success in that sense, but I really feel like there's a cultural barrier there, which we're slowly chipping away at, but I would say it's far from perfect at the moment.
Yeah, and I think too, obviously the project was driven out of Australia because that's where our headquarters is, but I think once people realised that Workday was here to stay as well, then, not all of them got that on 1 July. It took a couple of months. So they either got on board or they're not on board and they're not here anymore. So it was a case of, transitioning through that. And, some places adopted it quicker than others, but I think by at least having it in there and addressing those as they arose, meant that we were able to overcome them.
Sure. How did you approach your FDM design?
Look, we were fortunate that we got the most senior finance person in Workday come out to Australia for a couple of weeks and work with us on that. We had probably a core team of 6 or 7, including the CFO, and then a broader team of probably another 5 or 6. But it took a few goes. You can't underestimate that. But then you're fundamentally redesigning a business, and it's a case of trying to deal with, what you don't know sort of thing. And but certainly the guidance that we got from Workday helped. And now it just becomes second nature, like anything. But getting that core team understanding it, and then being able to communicate that out repeatedly is the key, I think, to the success of it.
Okay. Next question. I think you might have answered some of those. Was there a phased approach or a big bang approach?
It's pretty much big bang. Given the timelines that we had, driven by finance, but it was one of those things too that we, as much as it was a movable date, we weren't going to go live if it wasn't ready. So it was just a case of we did everything we could to make sure that we were ready to meet that date. But there's no way a CFO or a board are going to sign off if it's going to be, and Salmat's a listed company, so it has external reporting obligations that it's not going to release something like this without having the proper checks in place.
Sure. And actually this kind of follows on, this next question kind of follows on from that. If you had a choice to redo the project, would you choose to still go for all country rollout, or would you do it in a phased approach?
Well, no, I have no regrets. I think if I was doing it again, I would absolutely be pushing to do it all at once. In our case, and it may not be the case for everyone else, but definitely in our case, there was no logical or no driving reason why we would want to stagger it.
I agree. I don't think we would change the approach. I don't think there's any issues that we're facing today or have faced in the past that are as a result of Big Bang. I think the issues that we have faced, we would face regardless of how you roll it out.
Yeah.
Cool. Next question. What were some of the key drivers that led Salmat to evaluate and select Workday over other vendors such as SAP or Oracle?
I think in the end, Workday is a pure cloud solution, and in the true sense of the word. So we evaluated, I think I may have touched on the number we shortlisted was 3 providers, and in the end, it was a pretty clear decision for us in terms of the way Workday operates, and the capability that it has for us at that time was just clearly superior to the next best alternatives.
We CFO and I first demo of Workday was, if I remember the date, it was the 30th of October and 2014, and we signed on December 2014. So we basically, within the 6 or 7 weeks, pretty much were convinced, having had a look at the other solutions, because one was an incumbent, and our CFO was ex-Oracle. We'd had Microsoft Dynamics recently implemented in part of the business, but I guess it's fair to say that the solutions that they provided at the time weren't pure cloud solutions. So if we were going to hit our deadline and the functionality that we saw within Workday met our criteria, because we had all of that set out. So we were able to give Workday over 1,000 questions or requirements that they completed. So we didn't really take any shortcuts, but we just pushed hard to make a decision. So it definitely, I think the more time we would have spent deliberating on it, it would have cost us another year, and I don't think we would have had a better or different outcome.
And I think we'll probably make this the last question, because I think we're near the top of the hour now. What was the feedback from employees following implementation regarding the change management approach taken, given this project is the first project where you have dedicated change resources?
I think it was quite positive overall. So, again, part of our change management strategy was to actually embed a network of people around the business in our various locations and at various levels, management levels within the business. So people were hearing about the change and the move to Workday from a local colleague, and they were hearing about it on a weekly basis. So there was very regular, very targeted communication, and people knew exactly what to expect. We also had some very clear and targeted communication from our CEO, which was a series of broadcast messages to the business about the importance of Workday and how it fitted into our strategy. So I think people felt pretty good about it overall. I certainly don't feel like there was anyone who didn't know what was happening and why. And I think our engagement level, in terms of those statistics we touched on previously, demonstrates that people were keen and interested to, log in, have a look, put in their details, etc. So, notwithstanding some of the issues that we've talked about in some locations, which again I think we would probably have faced regardless of timing, I think overall it was very good engagement, and people responded positively to having regular communication and hearing that from someone they knew rather than just having a single medium through the executive team.
Yeah, I mean, our change management process is all about, cascading conversations. So you're not hearing just from the CEO, you're hearing it from your manager that's been cascaded down from their managers. And I think Dave's right in terms of, people didn't feel like they were just being communicated to. This is what's happening, this is when it's coming, this is what it means to you. And I think once people sort of understand that, they can get on board or make other decisions. So I think, it was generally well received.
Well, thank you very much, guys. I think that probably takes us to the end of this session. We've just got on the top of the hour. Thank you very much for all the questions for those folks online. Unfortunately, we haven't managed to get to all of them because there's a whole list of questions below this. So we'll try and come back to you guys individually following this. But thank you very much for your time. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And thanks to everyone on the call for joining today.